Hi everybody, it's Violet Kitty. Boundaries are the foundation for good and healthy interpersonal communications and interpersonal relationships. Establishing and enforcing healthy boundaries is a God-given right and responsibility of all Christians and indeed all of humanity. Nobody has the right to be a boundary breaker. Nobody has the right to run roughshod over you. Nobody has the right to bully you. These are boundary breakers. Christ himself established how to deal with a boundary breaker. Starting in Matthew chapter 18, verse 15, we read, "Moreover, if your brother sins against you, tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you've gained your brother. But if he will not hear, take with you one or two more, that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. And if he refuses to hear them, tell it to the church. But if he refuses to even hear the church, let him be to you like a heathen and a tax collector." Here Christ is telling us to tell somebody to back off. And if you tell somebody to back off and they don't, you tell someone else. And then tell somebody else. This is not gossiping about a person. This is establishing the Christian method of how we are to do things. Tell somebody to back off. Nobody has a right to abuse you. Nobody has a right to manipulate you. And you have a right to tell them to back off. God is the original establisher of boundaries. The 10 Commandments are boundaries. The entirety of the law are boundaries. Boundaries are by definition a barrier that establish our property, and your mental, emotional, and spiritual health are your property that you have a responsibility to protect. Plus, you have a responsibility to your fellow man to establish and enforce boundaries. Most boundary breakers are boundary breakers because nobody enforced boundaries from the time they were very young. They learned to bully, to run roughshod over people. And they deem that everybody has to fall into their every whim, making demands upon people, telling people that they don't have the right to establish boundaries. And this is a satanic nature. Anyone that tells you that you do not have the right to your boundaries is a satanic nature. And why? Because when Peter transgressed against Christ, Christ said, "Get behind me, Satan." He recognized the satanic nature. Get behind me, Satan. We have a right and responsibility to establish it. And if somebody is never enforced appropriate boundaries, they never learn. Most people who make it to adulthood who run roughshod over people probably never will learn, but you have the right to get them out of your life. One problem that many people experience is they want to be nice. Do you know that being nice is actually a problem when it gets to the point that you do not actually establish or enforce healthy boundaries? Be nice to a person, but if they're using your niceness as reason to abuse you, you cut them off. People will use your niceness as opportunity to abuse, to manipulate, to make you feel guilty. Sometimes they will try to make you feel guilty with Scripture. Again, that's a very satanic nature. Christ encountered that very nature in the wilderness for 40 days when Satan himself tried to manipulate the Lord. And he used Scripture to do it. And each time Christ came back with Scripture, do not put the Lord your God to the test. Worship God alone. he challenged the scripture twister with real scripture. When somebody uses scripture and twists it to abuse you, that is, again, a very satanic nature. And cut that person off. Because using scripture to abuse is something that Satan does. God gave you a right and responsibility to establish and enforce appropriate and healthy boundaries. He did not say something is sin and therefore don't do it. He looked and saw that something was detrimental to us, and so he decreed that it was sin and not to do so. Boundaries are our method of protection. Please establish them. It is your right and your responsibility. And that's all I have to say. VK